Imagine waking up one morning and being told you have 24 hours to leave your home forever. No warning, no explanation, no choice. Your entire city emptied. Millions of people forced onto the roads, marching into the jungle, into the rice fields, into the unknown. Children crying, elderly people collapsing on the side of the road. Hospital patients pushed out in their beds because the soldiers wouldn't wait. And if you refused, you were shot. This is not a story from the distant past. This is not medieval history. This happened in 1975, just 50 years ago, in a small country in Southeast Asia called Cambodia. And in the years that followed, nearly 2 million people were killed, not by a foreign enemy, not by a natural disaster, not by war with another country, by their own government. Welcome to Mielmobiel. Today we tell the story of the Cambodian genocide, the country that turned against its own people and nearly destroyed itself in the process. To understand what happened, you first need to understand what Cambodia was. For centuries, Cambodia had been a proud and ancient civilization. The builders of Angkor Wat, and one of the greatest temples ever constructed by human hands. A culture rich in art, music, religion, and tradition that stretched back more than 1,000 years. But by the 20th century, Cambodia was struggling, surrounded by powerful neighbors, caught in the middle of the Vietnam War, raging just across the border, and then bombed by American forces who believed Viet Cong soldiers were hiding inside Cambodian territory. Between 1969 and 1973, the United States dropped more bombs on Cambodia than were dropped on Japan during all of World War II. Let that sink in for a moment. Hundreds of thousands of Cambodian civilians died. Villages were destroyed, farmland was ruined, entire communities were traumatized and displaced. The country was unstable, the government was weak, the people were angry and desperate. And in that chaos, a movement was growing. A radical communist group known as the Khmer Rouge, led by a man who went by the name Pol Pot, a man who had studied in Paris, a man who had read about revolution, a man who had a vision, a terrifying one. Pol Pot believed that Cambodia needed to start over, completely, not reform, not gradual change, not evolution, a total, complete reset. He called it Year Zero. His idea was simple and absolutely brutal. Cambodia would be transformed into a pure agrarian society. No cities, no money, no schools, no technology, no religion, no newspapers, no individual freedom of any kind. Everyone would work the land, grow rice, live as peasants, as workers, as servants of the revolution. He believed cities were corrupt and diseased, that educated people were dangerous enemies of progress, that anyone with knowledge or skills from the modern world was a threat to his perfect society. So who was an enemy? Doctors, teachers, engineers, lawyers, professors, artists, Buddhist monks, anyone who had ever worked for the previous government, anyone who spoke a foreign language, anyone who had traveled abroad, and anyone who wore glasses, because glasses meant you could read, and reading meant you were educated, and educated people were enemies. On April 17th, 1975, the Khmer Rouge marched into the capital city of Phnom Penh. 2 million people lived there within 24 hours. The city was empty. Soldiers went door to door. Loudspeakers blared that everyone must leave immediately. They told people it was temporary, just 3 days. Then they could come back. It was a lie. Families grabbed what little they could carry and walked out into the roads. The sick and dying were pushed out of hospitals in their beds, IV drips still attached. Newborn babies carried by exhausted mothers who had given birth just hours before. the elderly abandoned on the roadside because they could not keep up with the march. The roads out of Phnom Penh were clogged with millions of people, going nowhere. What followed was systematic, organized, and absolutely horrifying. The Khmer Rouge divided Cambodia into agricultural work zones. People were assigned to labor camps and forced to work in the rice fields from before sunrise until long after sunset. Every single day, 7 days a week, with almost no food, no rest, no medicine, no contact with family. People died from starvation, from exhaustion, from disease, from despair. But that was not the worst of it. The Khmer Rouge was paranoid, constantly searching for enemies hiding within their own revolution. And their definition of enemy grew wider and wider and wider. Speak a foreign language, enemy. Practice Buddhism, enemy. Have a relative who worked for the old government, enemy. Complain about the lack of food, enemy. Cry when a family member died, enemy. People were dragged away in the night, taken to interrogation centers. The most notorious was a place called S21, a former high school in Phnom Penh that had been converted into a prison, a torture facility, a place of unimaginable horror. Of the estimated 17,000 people who passed through S21, only 7 survived. 7. The rest were taken to open fields outside the city, fields that would become known to the world as the killing fields. There they were executed. Guards used machetes, bamboo clubs, and iron bars to save bullets. Bodies were dumped into mass graves dug by the victims themselves before they died. Children were killed. Babies were killed. Because the Khmer Rouge believed that if you eliminated the parents, you had to eliminate the children too, to prevent them from growing up and seeking revenge. And while all of this was happening inside Cambodia, the world looked away. Cambodia was completely isolated. The Khmer Rouge controlled every piece of information leaving the country. No independent journalists were allowed in, no international observers, no aid workers. The outside world had almost no idea about the scale of what was happening behind those borders. Some governments even supported the Khmer Rouge politically, because in the Cold War logic of the time, they were seen as a useful counterweight against Vietnamese and Soviet influence in Southeast Asia. Politics, as always, more important than human lives. By the time Vietnam invaded Cambodia in late 1978 and drove the Khmer Rouge from power in January 1979, it was too late for nearly 2 million people. 2 million? In a country of only 8 million. Nearly 1 in 4 Cambodians was dead. Entire families wiped out. Entire villages erased from the map. A generation of doctors, teachers, engineers, and artists deliberately eliminated. Cambodia lost almost its entire educated class in just 4 years. The damage was so catastrophic that Cambodia is still recovering today, half a century later. Pol Pot died in 1998, under house arrest. He was never properly tried in court, never truly held accountable for his crimes. He died, peacefully, in his sleep, while the families of 2 million victims never received justice, never received answers, never received closure. The Cambodian genocide is one of the most extreme and devastating examples in all of history of what happens when a government turns against its own people. When ideology becomes more important than human life, when a small group of true believers decides they know better than everyone else, when a vision of a perfect society leads to mass murder on an unimaginable scale. It started with an idea, year 0, a fresh start, a perfect world, and it ended with 2 million bodies in the ground and a country that had to rebuild itself from absolute nothing, without doctors, without teachers, Without engineers, without the people who make a society function, Cambodia survived, but the scars remain. Walk through Phnom Penh today and you will find memorials, museums and mass graves, reminders of what was lost, reminders of what human beings are capable of doing to each other. This was the story of Cambodia, a country forced to start from zero by the people who were supposed to protect it. Subscribe to Mielmobiel, because there are many more stories like this one. Stories the world forgot too quickly. More soon